Hello and welcome everyone. We are in a very interesting new episode of what we post on our YouTube channel, and today I have a very well-known personality, a very great personality. It's a pleasure to sit here with Professor Henry Schaefer. I'm sure that most of you may have already heard about him, read about him, but to just give you a brief, he's one of the topmost chemists in the world. Citations, maximum number of citations like 63,000 odd citations. He's got like 1,500 odd articles in peer-reviewed journals, and many are just happy if they can get one or two in their lives. So he's got 1,500, and he's been nominated as one of the topmost scientists in the world. And as far as Rogers index is concerned, he's considered at number 116, and some rate him as in the top 50 scientists among the millions in the world. So it's been a huge pleasure for me, and I had the pleasure to be with him the whole day, and we thought of an impromptu interview with Professor Henry Schaefer. It's such a pleasure, Professor. Thank you for agreeing for this discussion. So,
thank you.
Without much ado, I'll jump directly in. First things first, Professor. You were an atheist, as I remember reading from your works, and you became a believer in Jesus Christ once you started your studies, your science studies, like not just school studies, science studies. But this goes against what is popular belief, because many people say that if you become a scientist, once you go to college, you study science, you'll be convinced that there is no God. So, what has been your story?
Well, thank you. I cannot say I was actually an atheist. I was just uncertain.
Okay.
I think it's probably... When I was 17 years old, I drove my motor scooter around Lake Michigan, which is a very large lake that encompasses the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. And I was kind of beginning to think about things, think about life. And I got back from that and was having trouble sleeping one night, and went upstairs to my parents' library and found a book called The Prince of Life. And it was a book about Jesus, and it wasn't long. I read it all in that night and finished it about 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'd like to tell you I became a Christian, but in fact it was 11 years later that happened. But I began to think about spiritual things. I began to read the Bible, which is a completely foreign book to me.
Oh, so you're not really brought up as a Christian boy with Sunday school and all those things?
No Sunday school.
Yes, that's a typical objection. Wow, so you're like 28. And which college and what was the study course at that time, Professor, when you became a Christian?
Well, when I became a Christian, I was it was my 4th year as professor at the University of California at Berkeley.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really something. Okay, my next, in your lecture, Theological Roots of Modern Science, you mentioned that modern science was born and grew in repudiation of Greek rationalism and out of a Christian worldview. Can you please elaborate on these points? And secondly is, why do you think it is in repudiation of Greek rationalism and out of a Christian worldview?
Well, if we go back to Galileo, when he began to construct inclined planes to roll marbles down, to begin to understand the laws of physics, his colleagues thought he had lost his mind. His colleagues thought he was crazy, and they asked him questions like, what does this have to do with life, with the truth, with all these big issues? And he said to them, no, I'm making observations. And so that was the beginning of the end of Greek rationalism, when experiments, carefully designed experiments, began to take place.
But you say it came out of a Christian worldview. How did you make that?
It came out of a Christian worldview because we were not assuming the answers were esoteric, but could be found in God's creation, which had great value to us.
Wow, excellent. Okay, now as a corollary to the previous question, Islam in some way shares some theology, I wouldn't say theology, rather some background, as people would like to say it, with the Christian worldview. Then why is it that the Islamic culture couldn't nourish modern science as well as Christian culture?
The famous example is the one of the famous observatory that was built in Istanbul,
Right.
I think in the year 1577. And this was the same era in which Tycho Brahe was remaking modern astronomy with his own observatory.
Right.
And so this beautiful machine was built in Istanbul, which showed every promise of being as effective as Tycho Brahe's experiments. And within a few weeks of being completed, it was burned down by a group of local ISIS members, I guess you could call them. Now that could happen to anybody. That could have happened in a Christian culture as well. But what's significant is it wasn't until, my goodness, another 300 years before the first modern telescope was built in the Middle East.
300 years after that.
Yeah, after that. So.
Wow, okay, that's quite something. Now, in your paper, Is Evolution a Good Theory? You mentioned and used Stephen Hawking's definition of a theory, which is, and I quote, "A theory is a good theory if it satisfies two requirements. One, it must accurately describe a class of observations on the basis of a model that contains only a few arbitrary elements.
Right.
And second, it must make definite predictions about the results of future observations." Now, you gave a grade B to requirement 1 and you gave a grade D to the second requirement, that it should make definite predictions about the results of future observations.
Yes.
Now, coming from one of the world's foremost theorists, this is truly an eye-opener and shocking for me, if I may say that. Can you please elaborate on these two requirements and why you chose to give B for requirement 1 and D for requirement 2?
Well, evolution can gather together a lot of facts in a systematic manner. It can't do that. But so I give it a grade of B. But the question is, does it predict the future? I think it hasn't done a very good job on this. I mean, you can't go for more than a month or so before Science magazine or Nature magazine comes out with an article about how the origin of birds is completely redone now. Everything we've done is now changed by this. So I don't think it does a good job explaining anything interesting.
Oh, okay.
In advance.
Yes.
In advance. It can explain a lot of things once the facts are there, but making predictions and having them confirmed experimentally, I don't think it's an area in which evolution has done very well.
Wow, that's well said. Thank you. And my next question on this would be, you have often mentioned that the age of Earth is not a major obstacle in believing in God. That's what you say. And
yes.
I agree with you. But since I would like to know your view on this, in your discussions with these scientists and colleges, do you find this as a major issue? Because honestly, Professor, I'm not nowhere close or even far off from where you are. I'm really way out, way distance away from you. But even when I speak to somebody and they simply say, "Oh, the Christian world is 6,000 years old. What science are you talking about?" So does this becomes like deal breaker or something of an embarrassment for you in any way when you are discussing? If not, then what are the major issues that eminent scientists like you think talk about?
Well, I think that I guess I should first say that my wife believes that the universe is no older than 10,000 years. So we have both sides of this issue covered in our family. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I think that there are different ways to understand Genesis 1, and certainly if we knew nothing at all about science, then the most obvious interpretation, Genesis 1, is that the days are 24-hour calendar days. On the other hand, my view is that all truth is God's truth, and if you give observation some credit, I think it's better to conclude that these days are very long periods of time, and we know that Peter in his letter says that a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So I interpret the days to be long periods of time. You might call them epochs. But it's not something I'm going to get in an argument with. I think that Christians have a lot of different opinions on this. And when I say Christians, I mean those who believe the Bible is true.
Right. So what are the major issues that you encountered when you are discussing the Bible with other eminent scientists?
When these discussions take place, the person I'm discussing with usually doesn't know very much about the background. They're not familiar with the Bible. They're not familiar with the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. They're not familiar with a bunch of things, so one has to be very patient. One has to be very patient. These discussions are not won over in an evening, typically.
Yes. Wow, okay. Now, how do I word this out? Is the Christian faith of a scientist like you a hindrance or an enabler for you in doing science? Why I'm asking you this question is that I was watching this, I wouldn't say interesting, this video by, you may have heard the name of Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he was listing out scientist after scientist, you name it, like whether it is Newton or Johannes Kepler, Tycho Brahe, and he was saying that how, because they believed in God, it stopped them from doing better. And if they hadn't believed in God, they could have done so much better. And he even goes to the extent of saying that he always tries to see that those who are in his department, whether they believe in God or not, because there could be an impediment for them to do science. So do you see that as an impediment? You believe in God and you are a Bible believing, core Orthodox Christian. It's been such an edifying day for me. But do you find that as an enabler or an impediment in doing science?
Well, I think these comments you've mentioned are just silliness. I mean, for a person of the individual you named to be criticizing Newton, Maxwell, Faraday, and so on, and saying they could have done better things, I mean, that's just silly. I mean, the contributions they made were monumental.
Right.
And so I think that, yes, they were aided by Christian faith in their belief that we live in a world that's been rationally designed, and that you should expect to find sequences, orderings, and the like.
Yeah. Yes, of course, and that's what drives you to be a scientist.
Well, I have always enjoyed being a scientist, even before I was a Christian. So I want to be clear on that. And I think once one understands the basic reasons we have confidence in science and the scientific method, one can do good science irrespective of one's religious convictions, whatever they may be. But it doesn't get started apart from Christianity.
Right.
And I would say personally that that there's since I became a Christian, there's been a new joy in every discovery that my students and I have made.
Wow. I can understand. I'm sure that even God is happy watching you uncovering His creation.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay, the next one. Scientists such as Isaac Newton have often expressed the joy in discovering new things in the world and how it led them to praise God. That's how I'm putting up a few quotes of Newton himself. Now you have several discoveries and path-breaking researches to your credit, Professor. So can you please tell me how these discoveries and researches helped you worship God better, if it has that is?
The ones that have helped me worship God better, I would say, are ones that I didn't expect at all. Where you really have to stand back and say, wow, God is amazing.
Wow.
Those are the ones that have helped me the most.
For my sake, can I ask you to maybe give me one or two examples, if you don't mind?
Well, a simple example is...
I know this could be highly technical, and I wouldn't understand a word of it.
A simple example relates to the molecule Si2H2. Very simple molecule, 2 silicon atoms and 2 hydrogen atoms. And while trying to understand a few experiments that were not very good experiments, well, I shouldn't say that, not very easy to interpret experiments, we discovered that one of the low-lying states of this Si2H2 is an amazing monobridged SiH-Si structure with a terminal hydrogen as well. Nothing like that had ever been observed or even thought of as far as I can remember.
Wow.
So that was fun. Wow, that was my response. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Doctor. Now, a couple of more questions and we are done. Now, I hear and read about experiences where believers in God, especially the Christian faith, are ridiculed. I see court cases happening, and they have to face terrible peer pressure in the universities for their belief in God, especially in developed countries. So, what would be your take on the same?
I think there's some of that. I can't really say that I've been subject to that because I was well known as a scientist before I became a Christian.
Yes.
And so I think that diverted a little bit of that. But one does hear comments. Usually these comments are secondhand.
Mm-hmm.
Professor X tells you that, do you know that Professor Y said such and such about you? And, so what?
But what about the students actually? You are such a towering personality that nobody can touch you. That's no doubt about that.
The students sometimes come into university thinking that science has disproved God.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach a course on this the first semester of every academic year.
Yes.
We certainly explain that that's not true.
Wow, you actually take it to that level. That's amazing. Okay, for upcoming scientists and energetic minds in the industry, like what we even observed today, what would be your advice to them when they go in the secular world, when they go in the secular universities, especially the anti-theist university culture that is prevailing? I wouldn't even say atheistic; it is anti-theist. That's the right word I use.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would be your advice to them as they face the challenges?
Well, one of the things I do is when we get to one of these aggressive atheists is to say, have you considered the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And the honest answer is, of course, they haven't. And so I'll give them something to read, and that maybe that can be helpful when one doesn't know what God is doing at every moment in time.
Right. Can you recommend some reading for the resurrection of Jesus Christ that's your particular favorite, your personal favorite?
Yes, there are quite a number of books. I gave one away this afternoon by William Lane Craig.
Yeah.
Something about the resurrection of the Son of God. I'm not sure.
No, yeah.
But William Lane Craig has written a book that's less than 200 pages long, and it really has most of what one needs in it. There's a more scholarly book by N.T. Wright, who in many respects I disagree with, but his book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, is more than 700 pages, and it really...
Yeah, well, it's a huge volume.
It includes everything. Yeah, I have two copies, one at home and one at my office when students come by. So it's good to challenge them.
Yes.
With that. I mean, I think that's a beginning point.
So if I may summarize, Professor, you said so well, but if I may summarize it, you're essentially saying is that those students to be better equipped on how to answer and defend their faith, and not just say it in a way that, okay, my mom gave it to me, so to say.
Yeah.
So, excellent. Okay, now what would be your advice? Okay, among the so-called horsemen, Richard Dawkins, you may have heard of it. He is often presented, Doctor, by atheist friends as an impeccable scientist of the topmost order.
No, I don't think that's true.
What would be, that was my question.
No,
So
I don't. Dawkins was a good scientist. He was never promoted to professor at Oxford. He was a good zoologist, not great, but I think he realized pretty early on that he was more gifted as a writer than as a scientist, and so he is a gifted writer.
yes.
There's no question about that. I don't think he treats the facts very carefully at times, but he's a gifted writer, and he's made millions and millions and millions of British pounds doing that, and that's what he's really good at. He finally did become a professor when Paul Allen, one of the Microsoft billionaires, gave Oxford a lot of money to make him the professor of atheism or some such title.
Wow. Seriously.
So he did become
Wow.
a professor of atheism, but not because of any science he'd done.
So there have been no scientific contributions from him. Can I say that?
I don't think we want to say no. I don't think he has changed the
Significant.
world.
I mean significant.
No, I don't think he's changed the world of biology in any significant way.
Okay, excellent. So coming to my last question, Doctor, for the day, you have been one of the topmost scientists who have expressed dissent against microevolution. So, what are your major objections against microevolution?
Against macroevolution.
Sorry, macroevolution.
So, yeah, microevolution is fine.
It is fine. Yes, macroevolution.
Yeah,
Yes.
we see it every day. Macroevolution is more problematic. All these discussions, Stephen Jay Gould realized there were problems with macroevolution, and so he coined this term. He talked about these steps in the fossil record. Punctuated equilibrium.
Yes. I was trying to remember that. Yeah. Punctuated equilibrium.
This is his way of explaining that things are not continuous. A person like Dawkins is utterly convinced that all changes are the result of a nearly infinite number of nearly infinitesimal micro changes.
Yes.
And that just doesn't seem to be consistent with what we observe in the laboratory. So I think one has to work harder than that. Gould was trying to, but as an atheist, he was fairly limited as well. Now, I'll also say that as a person who believes the Bible to be true, I do think that Adam and Eve were real people, the ancestors of every human being. So that's a factor too. Certainly, when I became a Christian, I believed that everything in evolution was true. It took me a long time to become skeptical.
No, so you analyze the evidence and you have your reasons for that.
Yeah.
So that's the way to be. That's always the way to be.
Maybe.
So there you have it, and I really appreciate you watching this, and I appreciate more Professor for agreeing to this. It's been a very hectic day, but he's still sitting here for this interview with me. So thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I look forward to meeting you again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.